central banks hold currencies for the same reason that they hold other assets. Okay, because a bank is, think of it as a collection of assets and liabilities with the purpose of providing credit to some agents. And the central bank is there basically to provide credit to banks, to commercial banks, and to manage the stability of the financial system. And in some countries, the central bank also may lend to private agents, to households and firms, but not in modern industrial economies. So the central bank owns foreign exchange, and that's a stock, and that represents the accumulation of net sales or net purchases and sales of foreign exchange over the history of the country. So over the past 200 years, the Banque de France has been involved in many things, funding Napoleon's wars, also buying beautiful real estate in Fontainebleau to have their branch office. They pay for those with liabilities that they have monopoly on creating. The Banque de France still exists today, but it doesn't issue currency anymore. It's part of the euro system. But the cumulative activity of the Banque de France is not just buying real estate or creating credit for French banks, it's also intervening in the foreign exchange market. So while the French franc existed, the French central bank was busy trying to stabilize the value of the French franc vis-a-vis the German mark or the Italian lira. And after 1978, it was a very serious operation, meaning that they had to intervene in very, very large quantities to make sure that the exchange rate didn't get out of whack. That's called a fixed exchange rate system. So what we see is a legacy of a fixed exchange rate system. That's one reason that central banks have accumulated a lot of foreign exchange. And central banks still are interested in maintaining the value of their currency. Now, the European Central Bank now manages the foreign exchange reserves of the euro system, so to a large extent. So it doesn't make sense to talk about the Banque de France. It makes sense to talk about the ECB or perhaps the Bank of China. If a central bank doesn't care about the external value of its foreign exchange rate, the rate at which the euro is traded with the dollar, for example, then the ECB shouldn't care about foreign exchange. You could actually sell it. You could just get rid of it. But there's always a possibility that a crisis might arise, and it might be necessary either to make loans in dollars somewhere or to possibly use those dollars to buttress the value of the euro in a crisis. So imagine if there were big selling spree on euros because people thought the euro was going to fall apart, the euro was going to dissolve, or that the European Central Bank was having issues with its banks. Then the European Central Bank has this war chest of dollars that it can use to support the value of the euro. And other central banks may use this technique to keep the value of their currency from appreciating. So over the past 15 to 20 years, the Bank of China has accumulated possibly on the order of 4 trillion US dollars as reserves in their balance sheet, because over the past 20 years, the Bank of China has tried to keep the yuan from appreciating. And to do that, they have to go to the market and just basically buy the dollars that people are trying to use to buy yuan. Okay, so the balance sheet just grows because of this intervention. So if a central bank decides to intervene on behalf of its currency, it's not a floating market, it's not a floating exchange rate anymore, it's actually a managed or a pegged exchange rate. But that also means that the central bank loses control over its balance sheet, especially when there's a pressure to appreciate the currency. So that's how central banks accumulate reserves. You can think of this as a war chest to fight against a speculative attack. You can think of it as another way of doing central bank monetary operations. And the Swiss National Bank often in its past has engaged in open market operations in currency to increase the supply of Swiss francs to its banking sector. So by buying dollars from Swiss banks, private banks, the Swiss National Bank was injecting liquidity into the system.